Shall we open in prayer? Father, as we come together to learn about your character, the first time in Scripture where you give us a detailed account of who you are, guide us and help us to glean from your word much about you so that it impacts our prayer life, impacts our faith, impacts the way that we worship, the way that we read your word, the way that we approach you and understand you. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Looking at the character of God is at times a very daunting topic that we want to engage with because it does seem so unbelievably broad. But there are passages within Scripture where God gives a nice, succinct picture of himself. Even though it is contained in a small amount, it is unbelievably vast. So, in the context of where this brief moment where God gives Moses a very succinct picture of himself, it occurs in a very broad context. And the context tells us much about how or who God is and how he responded to that context. So what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks is to be, first of all, looking at the context, then looking at what God said, and then breaking that down so as to try and understand his character. And so throughout this time, remember, just interact with me as much as you can, ask questions, stop me, and so on. The context that we're going to look at, we're not going to read through the whole entire part, but it appears from Exodus chapter 19 all the way through to the end of Exodus 34. So we're not going to read that entire part. We're going to visit various moments there. This is the time when the Israelites come to Mount Sinai. They've come out of Egypt. They've had a couple of grumblings, especially at the springs of Mara. They have said they wish to go back to Egypt because there were McDonald's burgers and lots of all the other kinds of things that they could have there. In their minds, it was better. It was less harsh. They have grumbled. And now they come to Mount Sinai. And God calls Moses up to Mount Sinai. Now, how many times do you think Moses went up and down Mount Sinai? Any idea? Give it a guess. I mean, throw a number out.
Didn't he go up once and stay up there?
He did go up once and stay up there for 40 days and 40 nights.
At least, right?
It's actually more than 3.
At least.
At least, yes. It's actually 8 times. Now, just for a moment, think. This guy is around about 81 years old now. He has to climb a mountain 8 times. Some of those quite soon after the other. So the context we're going to look at, and this is where the handout comes, and Julie, you can pass the handout around, and I want to orientate you just to that handout because we're going to look at the very broad context today as to this environment within which God reveals himself, and you would probably be quite shocked that right at the end that he would even choose to reveal himself as to what took place. So I've also popped up onto the board here, just so that we've got a quick reference. It's very confusing. All right, it looks confusing, but once we get the hang of it, it is going to be fairly simple. Each of the red letters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, those are times he went up. And the red arrows show he's going up, and the blue arrows show that he's coming down. So it's an up and down, up and down, up and down. So we pick up from where Moses and the Israelites arrive at Sinai. They arrive there, they camp. It's a massive, chaotic moment. Trying to get over 1 million people to attempt to try and camp in one place in some orderly fashion, and they're all complaining and moaning. We know what it's like trying to get a couple of kids to do something. Now imagine all this. You can imagine the amount of stress and frustration that Moses must have been going through trying to deal with this lot of people. So let's jump in, and what we're going to be looking at is the actual scriptural accounts of the conversations that God had with Moses, and in some of those cases, the things that he said when he came down. And it builds as a story that looks good, but it just turns bad. Everything has great potential, but it turns bad. And one of the things that we notice here, this is not their story so much as it's also our story. Because how many times have we, when we promise God we'll do this, we'll do that, it looks like it's going to turn out good, and after a couple of days, it's just turning out really, really bad. So let's begin. Chapter 19, verses 3 to 6. This is the first time he's called up the mountain. Let's pick it up from verse 1. It says, on the first day of the 3rd month after the Israelites left Egypt, so they're out of Egypt for 3 months, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. So we got the picture. There they are. Now, then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob." It's crucial that we notice how he's referring to the descendants of Jacob. He uses Jacob because there comes a time when Moses changes that. Okay. To the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you fully obey and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So, God is reminding them, you saw who I am in Egypt. How powerful God is, what He's able to do. They understand this covenant of Passover. They have seen how God has led them away from the Egyptians, led them through the Red Sea. Now, if you can imagine for a moment, you have gone through this. It is, first of all, traumatic. It's traumatic in the sense that you're up and you leave a place. You see miracles happening around you. Sometimes we go, I would just love to see miracles happening around me. Well, the emotional stress and strain that that's going to create for one is immense. They cross over the Red Sea. They get to a place where they settle down. They are happy. They are fine. They know that they need to obey this God. And also that they mustn't mess with him. Because he has taken out Egypt without a single person raising a hand. Now remember that Egypt at that stage was the superpower of that area of the world. Now imagine a superpower getting taken out without anybody firing a single shot. The trauma that is going to create for you, trying to assimilate this into your head. What on earth has happened? So, That's the first step. Moses comes down. He comes down the mountain and he speaks to the Israelites. This is Moses went, this is verse 7 of chapter 19. Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. And the people responded together. Notice this: we will do everything the Lord has said. We're going to do it. We're perfectly happy. You see, this is a high faith moment. We've seen what he does. Yes, we're perfectly happy. We will do that. They haven't really thought through much of this at the moment. But this is where they're at. So, Moses has to go back up again. Second time, back up the mountain. Verses 10 through to 14 is his time back up the mountain. Let's take it up from verse 9. The Lord said to Moses, I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. So, here God is solidifying Moses' position as leader. If they can see that what is happening, what is taking place, with regards to the mountain, Moses is called up there. They understand that Moses is interacting with God. When they come down, logically, they should be saying, oh yes, we will definitely follow you. Logically. And for us, we ourselves would say, oh yes, no, definitely. Now you can imagine, let's say for instance, I'm Moses. God appears, I go up into this dense cloud, and I speak with God, I come down, and I say, God has spoken to me, and you look at me and you go, Redden, most definitely, we know that you're chosen by God, we will definitely listen to everything that you're going to say. That's the context. So, Moses will now head back up again to hear what the Lord says. We pick it up from verse 10. The Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Make them wash their clothes. Sounds like they're a bunch of teenagers. And be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on the Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain. So here you've got the holiness of God is being shown to the Israelites. God is holy. You don't just break through and run up that mountain. And if somebody does, and they ask, and the Lord strikes them dead, you leave them. Don't touch that body because it's unclean. The moment you touch it, you're unclean. So in our minds, we've got this picture. Moses comes down and says to them, wash your clothes. And for 3 days, you're going to keep yourselves clean and you don't break through. These are the limits that have been put. You don't break through. I'm going to go back up again and talk to the Lord, but you keep your part. This is pretty simple. You think that maybe even a year one kid could kind of understand this. But we know that all it takes is one person in an entire group to not do something, and the group decides to do their own thing. So they've done all this, and everything seems to be that it is going well. Now, we're here. We're heading up the third time now. He goes up the third time. We pick it up here in chapter 19, and let's take it from verse 20. The Lord descended on top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. Okay, so let's just take it back a little bit, because the context of what the Israelites were seeing. Let's go back to verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Okay, that trumpet blast, we do not think that it was somebody else blowing it, but it was the sound that was coming from the mountain, because it's not attributed to any person blowing it. When Moses led the people out the camp, so they came out the camp to meet the Lord, they stood at the foot of the mountain. This is where they're at. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it with fire. This looks like a pretty scary scene. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of the Lord answered him. So he's standing there, he speaks, God answers him, tells him, okay, you can now come up. And so he goes up, verse 20, the Lord descended on the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said, I love this, go down and warn the people that they do not force their way through. I've just got up. Because there is that one person. If you've put limits, don't cross that. And you've got a person like me. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about that, Lord? See, I'll put my foot over. That's it. I'm one of those people who, if you do put a do not touch sign, I am going to touch it. It's just me. It sits in my head. I have to touch it. So yes. Go down and tell them that they do not force their way up through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. Now Moses answers and said to the Lord, the people cannot come up Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us, put limits around the mountain, and set it apart as holy. And the Lord replied, go down and bring Aaron up with you. But the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them. So he has to go down and he has to bring Aaron up. Now we don't know how far Aaron went up, but he goes up. Now during this time up on the mountain, God now tells him the 10 Commandments. They aren't written down. They're now orally given to him. So he has them, and he then comes down the mountain. So they're not written out. He has them orally. Now, when you would look at a document such as this, as these 10 Commandments, in the English, it looks very long. In Hebrew, it would be short words. So it's not this long narrative. It's actually fairly short. But it's been into what it is written is actually written really long as an explanation. But it's actually really short on those. It would have been short on those tablets. So he's gone up, he's come down. We don't know what Aaron has, how far up he went, but we know that he was up there. And that's important to know, that he has been up that mountain close to where God is. Now they come down, chapter 20, verse 18. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us or we will die. So they recognize something now. Now they're recognizing God, who was with them in Egypt and how he brought them out of Egypt. Here's another revelation of himself, and they are scared when they see this. And they recognize, okay, Moses, now we recognize that you are the one who, that if we're going to listen, it must come from you. Don't let the voice of God boom from that mountain, because the moment we hear that, we are dead. And they've seen how God can wipe out an entire nation. So they've got this picture. Verse 20, it says, Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Yes. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you and keep you from sinning. Okay. Notice that's also key. Hold on to that. The fact that Aaron went up, the fact that they see how powerful God is, the fact that it is, you've seen who he is, the fear of God, this will keep you from sinning. Hold these, if you can hold these up just somewhere, because it's important. We're going to bring those back in a couple of moments. Then the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. So he's come down and he goes back up again. This isn't a long period that he is down for, and he goes back up again. So we're now on to number 4. Fourth time that he goes up. Are you all with me? Okay. So chapter 20 and verse 22, we're just going to read a couple of those verses, verse 22 to 26, because this is important for something that will happen later. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites this, you have seen for yourselves that I spoke to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold. Okay, so you've seen who I am. You've got this clear picture. You are afraid. You have seen how powerful I am. You've heard my voice. Now, don't make anything that will resemble me. Okay, so that's clear that he's been told. Now he says, he gives him an understanding as to how worship is to happen. Make an altar of earth for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Whenever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. I will make an altar. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones. In other words, stones that are cut into a particular shape. For you will defile it if you use a tool on it. In other words, you're making something that could be seen as in the image of. And do not go up to an altar on steps, or your private parts may be exposed. So there's a clear indication as to don't be like the other nations. Because the other nations, their form of worship involved various sexual acts. Okay, this is important for what we're going to see. It's going to happen a little bit later on. So what happens here now is a fairly lengthy conversation that God has with Moses. Fairly lengthy. It runs here. It runs from chapter 20, 21, 22, and 23. It's known as the Book of the Covenant. It gives how they are to behave. It's not the entire Book of the Covenant, but it is known as the Book of the Covenant because there are some further things that are added to it. But this is the basics of how you are going to live within this covenant. Now, the understanding of a covenant, in ancient times, what was known as a Surarian covenant was that somebody who was of far greater power would come to somebody who was far less, and they would make a covenant with them because they knew that their presence threatened somebody who was smaller. So with making this covenant with them, it was a covenant to be able to say, I know that I'm stronger. You who are smaller and weaker, if I exercise my strength, you're going to be obliterated. So my covenant with you is that I'm going to look after you. And in looking after you, I will provide everything that you need, your protection, and if you at any times don't have food and water and so on, I will provide that. And if another nation comes along and tries to cause trouble with you, my army will be there. And then they would add on, as times went by, they would add on statements such as, I'm this great, wonderful king. And if I do not fulfill the rules and the requirements of this covenant, may the punishment of not fulfilling this covenant be upon myself. So they bound themselves to this covenant, to be able to say that I'm great. Now, this falls very much so in line similar, because you must remember, these people need to have something that is within their frame of reference. God who is far greater comes to people who are far less. I will be your God, you will be my people. I will do all these following things for you, but you must obey me. If you get attacked, I will be there. I will protect you. I will provide for you. I will give everything that you need. So it follows very much so this Syrian covenant that would have been signed. So the people understand this. They go, yes, I know, we understand this. It's quite simple to kind of take in. So Moses comes down from the mountain, and he now is going to reveal this to the people. So they first of all understood how great and powerful and mighty and how awesome God is. And he comes down to say to them, you don't make any image of him. You don't make altars of dressed stone. If at best you just make it of earth. You can sacrifice your animals on there. The moment that God calls for his name to be glorified, you sacrifice animals on there. And it goes through a whole lot of various things. Now, beginning of chapter 24. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel. So he's calling for the leadership of Israel to now come up to the mountain. They have had the book of the law read to them. You are to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach the Lord, and others must not come near it. So, Moses, you're going to come up. You come up to where you originally would have been in the other times that you came up. This is now number 5 that we're talking about. You go to wherever you've obviously been for the last 4 times, but these other guys stay at a distance. They're not permitted to come closer, but they're up the mountain. When Moses went and told all the people the words and laws, they responded with one voice. This is the second time that they say this. Everything the Lord has said, we will do. Now Moses takes us and he writes everything down. This is the first time we get an indication of something being written. So everything is written. Now, the next morning, they get up very early and they built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. So they're enacting what God had said to Moses up on the mountain, his previous visit, the book of the covenant. They're enacting this now. So they've now got an opportunity of, we call it, practicing it. They're actually doing this now. Verse 6, Moses took half of the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant, that's the one that he had now written down, and read it to the people. So they hear it, and they responded. It's the third time. We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey. So 3 times they have said this now. So they are really tying themselves into this covenant. We will do everything that the Lord has said. And then Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So now the covenant is sealed. But there has to now be, when you, in ancient times, under this covenant, the king who makes this covenant with a smaller group of people, when the covenant was sealed, an animal was sacrificed, then there would be a meal. You would sit down and you would eat. The leaders would sit and they would eat together. So now they're called up the mountain. Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders. So this is the second time Aaron goes up. And they saw the God of Israel. They see him. This is important. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as bright blue as the sky. But God did not raise his hand against these elders of Israel. They saw God and they ate and drank. Okay, there's a covenant that is sealed. But what's even more important, they saw God. Now, we don't know how much of him. What we do know is that they didn't see his face. Okay, but they saw something of him. So they've now got an image in their heads as to, okay, this is who he is. So can you see how this is building? And this group of people who have gone up are now going, okay, for the first time, we're now seeing who this is who brought us out of Egypt. You can imagine the stories that would be told when they come down. We saw God. We saw who this God is. The stories will be incredible. You with me at the moment? Okay, nobody's drifted off. Nobody's going like, I don't know where on earth, whether we're up or down at all. Okay, now they all come down. They tell the stories. Chapter 24, verse 12. Sorry, no, they're still up there. They're still up there. Sorry, no, they have come down now. Sorry, they have come down. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandments I have written for their instruction. So God's going to give this to him now, written on stone tablets. The book of the covenant, Moses has written it out. But those laws that set them apart as to be a holy people, and God as holy, he will inscribe that. Okay. There's a significance in this, because God wants to make sure that his holiness is not devalued in any way. This needs to be very, very clear to them. So he's going to go up. Then Moses set out with Joshua. Okay, Joshua's going to go now. If this is getting confusing at any stage, just go like, I am confused. Everybody's going up and down and up and down. It's like somebody's at a gym going up and down on a Stairmaster. Okay, so Joshua goes up, and this is significant also, because as Joshua goes up, remember Joshua is Moses' successor. So he goes up. And when they go up, you must remember that the stories by the 70 elders, by the other guys who had gone up, and they are telling these stories back in the camp. They will definitely not have just been quiet, because the people would have wanted to know what was going on up there. And Moses set out with Joshua, his assistant, and Moses went up to the mountain. He said to the elders, these are the 70 elders, wait here for us until we come back to you. Aaron, who has been up twice, and Hur, who works with Aaron, who is Miriam's son, are with you, and anyone involved in a dispute can go to them. When Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered, and the glory of the Lord settled on the mountain. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain. On the seventh day, the Lord called Moses from within the cloud. Okay, this is significant. If you've been on the Genesis study, notice that the world created in the 6 days, and the seventh day God rested. What was the meaning of God resting? Well, in ancient literature, the understanding of that is that when a God rested from his work, that was when he enters into his temple and he takes control. So this is said that now God, for 6 days, this mountain is blazing. On the seventh day, God says to Moses, okay, now you can come up. And so for a Jew, this is once again a creation story that is going through their minds. And on the seventh day, he comes up, and verse 17, to the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain, and Moses entered the cloud as he went up, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Now Joshua doesn't go all the way up with him, he stays down. And while he is up there, the things that are revealed to Moses now in the 40 days and 40 nights is now the tabernacle. So you can see the link now. God, who enters into his temple and he starts to rule, God now shows Moses what this temple looks like. And he's told how to build this tabernacle and all the instruments that are within this tabernacle. And it's a fairly lengthy narrative that takes place all the way through to the end of chapter 32. Everything that will happen within the temple that is to do with the temple, the Ark of the Covenant, the table, the lampstand, how the priests are to behave, their garments, everything that is to be done regarding that temple is now given to Moses, which is very much so. Now God saying, I'm now in my temple and I'm ruling, and this is how you behave now when I'm in my temple. Okay, now remember what I said to you about them saying 3 times, we will do everything that you have said, for 3 times. Remember that they had seen God working in Egypt, take out an entire, a superpower's army, cripple the nation, rescue them. They have seen God on the mountain. They have said, don't let this God talk to us because we are scared. They've heard the book of the covenant. They have signed and agreed to this covenant. They have had the 70 elders go up who have seen God and have come down and would have shared this story. So they've got all of this. Now, we come to chapter 32. There's chaos in the camp. Beginning of 32. When the people saw that Moses was long in coming down from the mountain, what are they doing? They're bored. 40 days and 40 nights. We don't know for how long into that 40 days and 40 nights. But they see that the Lord Moses is away, and they gather around Aaron. Remember, Aaron's been up there twice. Once not seeing God, once seeing God. And he's had a whole lot of other experiences with God. So they gather around Aaron. Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. Where's he gone? So, not let's continue with this covenant. Can you make something for us? Aaron answered them. There is no attempt by Aaron to say no. Notice that. He says, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me. to him. Okay? So all the people took of the earrings and brought them to Aaron, and that's a lot of gold. He took what they handed to him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. What were they told in the book of the covenant? Don't fashion anything. And now, a calf. That's a symbol of domestication. They're trying to domesticate God. Can they control him?
It is so easy to forget. For us as well.
Yes.
Doesn't this tell us to be very careful ourselves, not to take a long time out of reading the Bible or praying or being with God, and then this will happen to us as well.
Yes. So that comment that we take time away from the Lord, not reading Bible, not praying, not being in fellowship with other Christians, what begins to happen? Go diving, instead of doing the things that you're supposed to do, and we start to slip away. That's what starts to happen. So they start to try to domesticate God. We will go into that a little bit more next week. Okay, but what happens is that there is this chaos. Now, God speaks to Moses. This is in verse 9 of chapter 32. I've seen these people, the Lord said to Moses, and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone, God says to Moses, so that my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. I'm just going to wipe them out. But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. Lord, he said, why should your anger burn against your people? Now, he doesn't know what's actually happening. Why should your anger burn against these people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, it is with evil intent that you brought them out to kill them in the mountains and wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and now he calls Jacob Israel. Because he's appealing to this covenant. To whom you swore by yourself, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Now Moses comes down the mountain and he's got the 2 tablets of the covenant. As he's coming down the mountain, he meets up with Joshua. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, there's sound of war in the camp. He doesn't even know what's going on. And it's interesting here, Joshua has been kept from this. So he's able to lead the nation. Moses replied, it's not the sound of victory. It's the sound of defeat. It's the sound of singing that I hear. Moses approaches the camp and he sees this chaotic moment. And once again, we'll deal with that next week. The 7th time, Moses now goes up the mountain. Moses went back to the Lord. This is in chapter 32, verse 31. Moses went back to the Lord and said, oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written. In other words, cancel this covenant. Cancel it. If you're not going to forgive, cancel it. Because you see, the covenant would be, is that if the smaller nation could not fulfill the side of obedience, the greater nation had the authority to wipe them out. Moses is pleading that take this covenant away, that at least these people can live. Because the covenant now demands that God wipe them out entirely. That's the agreement that they've signed. So Moses is saying, cancel this whole thing out. Forget that we even had dinner together. Just cancel the whole thing out. Then the Lord replied to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. Okay, they will be excluded from the covenant. Now go and lead the people to the place I spoke of, and notice, and my angel will go before you. Okay, it's like God's pulling back here. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin. These are the people who've caused this. And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made. And notice, Aaron's not wiped out. I have no clue why. Other than the fact that God did it because he's God. God chose. He chose Aaron, and that's it. That's God's nature. He can do what he wants. He's sovereign.
He's a forgiving God.
He is a forgiving God. So often I hear people say, the Old Testament God's a God of wrath, and the New Testament God's a God of love. No, God's a God of love in the Old and the New. But he's also God of wrath in the New also. So he's the same character the whole way through. We're still busy with number 7. Then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt. Even God is going, I'm backpedaling from this covenant. You brought out of Egypt, and go out to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants, and I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you. Because you're a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. Oh, this is just, everything here is just chaotic. This is that moment where, that this is where you need marriage counseling. You need to go for therapy. And this begins to happen, and this we will deal with in the weeks to come in chapter 33 from verse 7. Moses is sitting in a tent down at the bottom, and he starts to speak to the Lord. Let's just read just a few of those passages from verse 7. This is chapter 33. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrance of their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. In my mind, I'm just thinking how funny that must have looked. And the people saying, what's he doing in there? Why is he going there all day? What's he do there? What are we paying him for? As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, they stood and worshipped, each at the entrance of their tent. And the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp with his young assistant Joshua, so we know that Joshua would go with him. It was during this time in the tent that Moses says to God, can I see you? Moses' heart breaks. Can I see you? I want to actually know who you are. Show me really who are you? Show me what your character is. Show me what does it mean to really serve you? Who are you really? At this moment he's going, I'm confused.
That's a
Question, yes.
In verse 11 of 33, it says, Joshua did not leave the tent.
No, he would stay there.
So he stayed there while Moses went out to the people.
Yes, except that one time that he went up the mountain with him. Probably needed a bit of exercise. Okay, number 8. He goes up. Chapter 34 and verse 4. Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets. Why? Because he had broken the previous ones, like the first ones, and went up Mount Sinai early in the morning, as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried two stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down on the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name. The Lord claimed his name, the Lord, and he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love, faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation. And we will, in a sense, not go much further than that today. But that passage of the self-revelation of God is the most quoted passage in the Old Testament. It's quoted around 30 times, sometimes in full and sometimes in part, because it was so significant, this revelation of God. And notice the self-revelation of God as to who he is in the midst of this chaos. If you look at the context, the building up, seeing everything of who God is, agreeing to do everything, and a month goes by, and they try to domesticate God. In fact, this golden calf, they call this golden calf Yahweh, the God who must now lead them. And they have done the most abhorrent sin. God has the full legal authority at that moment to wipe the entire nation off the face of the earth. But he doesn't, and Moses is confused. Who is he? Lord, show me who you are. I don't know who you are. I'm so confused. Because how am I supposed to relate to you? By all authority, you can wipe us out. This covenant, if we can get out of it, we as a nation will live. But the whole nation, by virtue of the fact that they are there, whether they partook in it at all or not, is irrespective. They as a nation, corporately, broke the covenant. Moses wants to get out of it. God is just going, I'm going to deal with you because it is my legal right to. And I'm not even going to go with you. And then he reveals these things. This is who I am. We'll leave it there today. And from next week, we'll pick up with the golden calf story. And we'll start to then move into this character of who God is. And we'll start to see some phenomenal things.